What's up, Bears fans? Welcome back to another edition of the Willis Twin Towers podcast. Sorry for the delay here. Tim is still having issues with his computer. Hopefully we'll get that thing figured out in the next couple weeks. Before I swing it over to him, just a quick reminder, guys, as always, to please like the video, subscribe to the channel, give us a follow on X or Twitter. You can follow our executive producer, Aldo, at Barroom Network. You can follow me at _Jeff Willis, and you can follow Tim at Tim Willis 24. And I'll remind you guys again at the end of the show, in about an hour after we conclude, Aldo is having an episode of Bare Their Souls with Tooch, and I will likely be making a guest appearance myself on tonight. And I don't know about Tim, but I will probably be on for at least a little bit. So you guys will get to see me for a little bit myself. Anyhow, we're going to talk a little bit tonight about the running backs in the draft class and who we think the Bears might be targeting, who could be serious possibilities for them based on things that have been happening. And also some of our guys that we like ourselves. So without further ado, let me switch it over to Tim. Tim, why don't you introduce yourself? And before we get into the running back talk, I do want to talk about a few other things that are kind of off subject. So go ahead, Tim, introduce yourself and we'll get into stuff.
Well, I think I'm having some slow internet issues, so you guys will have to bear with me for a minute. Let me know if it's an issue for you guys. Yeah, a lot of stuff going on right now, a lot of opinions going out there. Guys, at this point in time, that's all this is. It's just a matter of opinion. The only ones that truly matter are the Bears front office and coaching staff and what they decide to do at the end of the day. But tonight, I kind of want to lean in one direction because there are several needs that this team needs. But as far as starters, there's only a few, in my opinion. Most of it is just we need depth. So tonight, later on, we're going to focus on the running backs in this draft class. I will let you guys know what my rankings are for that. And then Jeff can also jump in there with his, if he has rankings or just players that he likes and where he thinks they are. I will start by saying that I don't think every running back is a fit for this offense. And if we're being quite frank, I don't think that they're going to be looking for a player that is similar in skill set to DeAndre Swift. They're going to look for somebody who can complement him. That's my personal opinion. So we'll get into that here in a little bit, but certainly going to be a great conversation, and I can't wait to dive in with you guys and with Jeff. So, Jeff, is there anything you want to start us off with before we jump into our running back talk?
Yeah, so first of all, like I mentioned at the top of the hour, there's a couple of things I want to discuss beforehand, but Aldo just had a graphic on the screen, and it's funny you actually mentioned that, Aldo. If you can put that back on the screen, there's something I said about a year ago. It was when it was pre-draft last year. We were talking about what the Bears might be doing, and I said nobody knows shit, because we were trying to figure out whether the Bears might, move down, whether this was before Fields even got traded, I believe. So there was a lot of speculation what the Bears might do. And so I had said that nobody knows shit. And it's actually funny that you're posting this right now, Aldo, because Tim was having a conversation on X with another podcaster the other day. And they had been talking about the fact that I said that for whatever reason. I don't remember how it came up, but I happened to go and check out their work, and it was pretty good. They have some good work I was watching with it. They were talking about running backs in an episode that I saw. And the name of that podcast was, I believe, Chicago Sports Network, if I am not mistaken. I hope I'm right about that because I only had a chance to check out their stuff for a little bit. But I just recently met this guy through Twitter, through Tim. So you should check out their work if you have a chance to, guys. It's pretty good. And J2K did the designs on their stuff, and it's excellent, J2K. So bravo on that and all your other stuff. So guys, go ahead and check that out. Like I said, and I do want to talk about a couple other things, like I said, before we get into the running back talk, which is fine because Tim has to try to get his internet figured out. So couple things. I was watching some interviews last week. As you guys know, Jeff Joniak, the voice of the Bears, he has a tendency to do some segments. I shouldn't say tendency, that's a bad word, but he does some segments with either players with the Bears or coaches or executives. He has he's obviously got an in with the team because he works for the team. So this past week, he was doing some interviews and they're short interviews, by the way. One I was watching was with Eric Bieniemy, and the other was with Dan Rochar, the new offensive line coach. And these are both podcasts. They're not visual. So I watched them on YouTube. So I was really listening more or less than anything else. But in any case, Eric Bieniemy was a really interesting interview to me. And as you guys know, he's the new running backs coach. And he really only has a tie, to my knowledge, the only tie he really has to this current regime is through Ryan Poles and their time together in Kansas City. But Ben Johnson wanted to bring him on. As you guys know, we talked about this before. Johnson kind of reached outside his comfort tree for the most part. I mean, he didn't want to just bring in guys that he knew and liked. And he said that before in one of his pressers, I believe. So he's bringing in some guys with different ideas that he hasn't necessarily worked with, because he does want that difference of opinion in the room to kind of drive things. And I think that's a good thing. So Eric Bieniemy is an example of that. This is a guy that's had a lot of success coaching running backs all the way from back in his time at UCLA. So what I'm interested to see is the way he has a reputation of being a guy who's a perfectionist as a coach and who's going to expect a lot out of you. And he's kind of hard, and he has a reputation for being hard on players. But at the same time, he's a highly respected coach as well. And I think the players respect him in their own right. So listening to him talk about how demanding he kind of is and how he was going to expect his guys to do things in a certain way was kind of refreshing to hear. You kind of want to hear that from your running backs coach. And he also mentioned DeAndre Swift in the interview, how he thinks that he's a good player and he liked what he sees. And but one thing that I caught that was interesting to me was he said he needs to understand that he can get 4.5 between the tackles, but he can also break the long one. So I think that's kind of him alluding to the fact that, as we all know, DeAndre Swift has a tendency to kind of bounce it outside a little too often, before he really gives it a chance to open up in the middle. So I want to see how he works with all these backs and whoever they bring in, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. So I thought the Bieniemy interview was really interesting because we're going to get a chance to see him work with both the veteran Swift, another guy who's becoming a veteran in Quinshon Judkins, even though he is still a young player. And then we're going to have a potentially new draft pick that comes in. And then Ian Wheeler, who we can't forget about, who's coming off the ACL injury last year, that guy is awfully fast. I think that Ben Johnson could do some stuff with him if he ends up being on the active roster. So we'll have to see what kind of coaching Bieniemy can do with him as well. So check out the interview if you guys haven't. These interviews, by the way, I believe were posted from the Bears YouTube site, but they're two different I don't know what you want to call them, two different segments, I guess. One is called like Bears ETC, and that was the one with Bieniemy, I believe. And the other one that I was listening to, I think it's called Bears Weekly, and that one was with Dan Rochar, the offensive line coach, is coming in. And I think this was an interesting interview as well, because Rochar seems to me like a very intelligent guy. And the word that comes to mind to me after listening to that interview and seeing the way he was talking and learning about his past experiences, adaptive is what I think he is. I think he is a very adaptive guy, and I think that's a really good fit for this regime and this coaching staff, because, I mean, obviously he had a lot of success in New Orleans, but that wasn't super recent. He did have success also recently in the college level, but, this is a different game today it's constantly evolving. So I want to see how adaptive he can be in this scheme with Ben Johnson, because it's obviously going to be different. And one thing he mentioned about Johnson is that he liked listening to how Johnson understood offensive line play and technique and how he wanted to learn about technique. So I really thought that was cool. So I think all together with Rochar, with the past success, with the things that I heard from him in that interview, which you guys, I'm imploring you to please go check those out, because they're good. They're only short. They're short little interviews with these guys. I mean, the whole podcasts are long, but the clips with just Rochar and Bieniemy in these two separate interviews are relatively short. They're probably about 10 minutes long a piece, if that. So go check them out. They're really good. But like I was saying about Rochar, I have a lot of high hopes for the way he's going to develop some of these offensive linemen. Obviously the guys that they brought in free agency and through the trade market are guys who are really good, and they have some, high level play in the NFL already. But I want to see how he develops Darnell Wright and Braxton Jones and Karan Amagaji, some of these other young guys like Bill Murray, how these guys develop into whether they become quality backups or quality, starting caliber players. So I think it's cool to see and listen to these guys talk and hear their opinions and see how they've had different past experiences. And Roshar, for instance, was a guy that, and when I say adaptive, he talked about how he was a quarterback when he was younger. He played quarterback in college, I believe. And then when he started coaching offensive line, he originally was, they were running like gap and power based stuff. And then it wasn't until like much later in his career, he was working with a different coach, and I can't remember who it was now, but they started that coach was running wide zone based stuff. So he learned that scheme and that concept, which is obviously what the Bears are going to be doing with Ben Johnson. You don't bring in Drew Dahlman if you don't plan to run outside zone. So I think that this is going to be a really good fit for him. The way he's, like I said, been able to adapt and learn, and he understands this scheme already to an extent, the way they're going to like to do things. And I think that it's just going to really mesh well. I think Ben Johnson has, I think just from what I'm seeing from him and his charisma and his character and the way he approaches people around him, I think that the other coaches are going to gravitate to that, and they're going to all really work well together, in my opinion. I hope that's the case because the Bears are in desperate need of that. So I'm optimistic about it. I hope you guys are too. And I want you to check those, like I said, check those videos out if you haven't. One last thing I want to mention before we get into running back stuff. I don't know what's going on with Tim and if he's still behind bars or what here, but another thing I want to mention. I reposted something that I saw on X earlier. There's a guy named Duke Manyweather who is a offensive line guy. I believe he runs an offensive line. I think it's called OL Masterminds. It's a clinic or camp. A lot of NFL players have gone through this before, right? So he mentioned something about, he reposted another guy's post, and I can't remember who the person was, but it was in regards to the combine and the measurements and how some of these offensive linemen and the other guys, whoever the scout was who was running the measurements, had apparently not, there was some speculation that they weren't doing it right. So Manyweather reposted this, and in his quote, he actually said that he heard from other scouts and coaches around the league that the guy who was doing the measurements was doing it incorrectly, and he stood on it and would not admit that he was doing it wrong. So I am very interested to see who they bring in for top 30 visits as far as like offensive linemen are concerned, because I'm betting you that they want to get measurements for themselves on some of these guys, like Will Campbell, for instance, because he measured in at 33 inches at his pro day by NFL executives and scouts, Tim, not by LSU's pro day people.
I didn't say that.
NFL evaluators. I was just going to – I saw you getting ready to interrupt.
Because I was going to ask you.
In any case, go ahead. Hang on. I'll swing it over to you in just a second. But anyways – But and by the way, I see a lot of you guys in the chat that, and I appreciate you being in here with your comments and stuff. I see Carl's in there. Nice to see you, Carl. We appreciate you being on a couple weeks ago. But anyways, guys, I thought that was an interesting post that guy had said that, because I want to see what they do now, who they bring in, who they get measurements on and workouts from and whatnot. So that is an interesting tidbit there, because like I said, we talked about this before when, there's a difference for Will Campbell. When you're talking about the minimum threshold being 33 for tackles, at least that's what a lot of teams and scouts, what they're looking for. It's got to be at least 33, and they really want 34 plus. But when you're at 32 and 5/8, which is where he measured the combine, that's going to raise some red flags for a lot of teams if it wasn't already. So now that you're seeing him at 33 at his pro day, like I said, I want to see what the Bears do, who they bring in, and what they see there, because that kind of changes things for me, or at least it could. So it opens up some possibilities. But what was your question, Tim? And do you have any thoughts on that?
It's not so much a question. The way I read what you were just discussing was it sounded as if the NFL scout that was at LSU's pro day didn't make a good, accurate measurement and didn't want to admit to it. That's the way I understood it. So do you have...
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask, do you have a definitive knowledge based on what that tweet was, whether he was talking about the combine or if he was talking about the pro day?
Well, I wouldn't say it's definitive, but based on the wording, I'm going to read you guys what it says right now, and you guys can make your own decision on this. But based on the wording, to me, it sounds like they're discussing the scout at the combine and that it was incorrect there. So I'll read it to you. So the guy's name was Alex Barth that did the original tweet here, and it's got a list of all the players. It's I want to say there's like 15 guys here, a lot of offensive linemen, and their measurements from the combine and from the pro days and the difference. So, and some of them are pretty significant, like around an inch or so. So here's what the original post says. It says, it's not just Will Campbell. The difference in his arm measurement is actually smaller than many of the top players from both the Senior and Shrine Bowls. Seems like the NFL may have gotten something wrong at the combine. I think teams want to get their own numbers this year. Then the guy I mentioned, Duke Manyweather, the O-line masterminds guy, reposted saying other scouts/teams said that the scout that did the measuring did it wrong and was unwilling to admit he was wrong. It happens often. I've seen the same with timing and measurements at pro days. So that leads me to believe, by the way he ended his sentence, he was talking about the combine measurement as well. You see what I'm saying by the wording? That's how I think that went.
Well, based on the second one, that's where I wasn't sure. Now, your first tweet kind of clarified that, but the second one, to me, could have gone either way. It could have been talking about the pro day or the combine. I will say this. I'm not so sure I take it. I'm looking at that more like taking it with a grain of salt, because J2K makes an excellent point here when he says, even if it was inaccurate, it was the same guy doing it for everybody, which is
but still, hang on. I agree, and I'm not saying he's doing a disservice. I mean, but to one particular player, but at the same time, he could potentially be doing a disservice to a lot of players, because if they're measuring in short wingspans, short arm lengths, and whatnot, and that's not actually how short they are, that's not fair to the player. So, a lot of teams are going to look at them in a different light if they have below threshold marks. So I think I agree with you to an extent, J2K, but even if it's wrong, it's got to be accurate. That's the goal, right? So that's what we want to see.
Well, this is where I get a little bit into the weeds here, because I'm going to default to the NFL mind that we have here at the network, and that's Greg Gabriel. I will default to him because he's the one who's been in those buildings, who's been at the combine, who's been at the pro days, and he is of the mindset that the only accurate and the only truly, I'll say accurate again, the only truly accurate measurements that are done to standard are the ones done at the combine, because it's the same guy and he's been trained to do it properly. Whereas you get to these pro days and these NFL scouts who aren't necessarily trained correctly do these measurements and they don't match for that reason, because they're not trained to do it the proper way. So you're going to see some fluctuation in measurements. So, like I said, I'm going to default to the guy who's been there, done that, and knows. And according to him, that's the only one that truly matters, is the combine measurement. So, look, what it comes down to is it's not even just, I understand the Will Campbell thing. I do. But from what I understand, it's not just his arm length. It's the narrow shoulders and it's the wingspan, which is incredibly poor for his size. You should have a longer wingspan than you are tall. That's everybody. And it sounds to me like he's shorter in wingspan than he is in height. So, look, we've had this Will Campbell conversation for the last couple weeks now. I'm honestly kind of sick of it, because at the end of the day, I could be wrong. Everybody could be wrong. Who knows what's really going to happen with him? But it's just, in my opinion, of the fact that the Bears wouldn't draft a guy like him to play tackle if he's got short arms. I just don't see it happening. Now, whether or not they use the combine measurements or if they use the pro day measurements because they trust the scout, I don't know. So that's why I say, from my perspective, I'm going to default to the guy who's been there, done that, the former scouting director of the Chicago Bears who did it for 30-something years. That's just my opinion.
Well, I'm not disagreeing with Greg. Don't get me wrong. I would never disagree with Greg on anything. I'm just saying, if a reputable source, so just to give you an idea who this guy is real quick, guys, if you don't know already, hang on, let me go back to this real fast, because I think it's important to know. He's a reputable guy. He's got 56,000 followers. One of them was, I believe he trains Darnell Wright and some other guys. He is the offensive line scouting department for O-line masterminds. Yeah. So these guys it's a very reputable source, someone who has a lot of connections within the league. So I'm not going to read off your comment there, Carl. If Tim wants to, he can, but it's pretty funny.
Was it at least cold that night, Carl?
But in any case, yeah, I mean, I see what you're saying. Like J2K made a comment in here about the 3/8 being a little bit of a difference, how that's not huge. But, some of these guys, like, let me see. There's one guy, for instance, like Marcus Embo from Purdue. They got his arm length off by a whole inch. He went from 32 to 33. That's kind of a big deal for him, Now he's at the minimum threshold where before you're looking at this guy's for sure a guard or a center, with that arm length at 32 inches. So, I mean, it can be a big deal for some guys. That's all I'm saying. Like, you want it to be accurate. Obviously, you want it to be fair and the same for everybody, but you also want it to be accurate. And I'm not disagreeing with Greg, but all I'm saying is if this is a scout who other scouts and teams are saying that, like, they're doing it wrong, then there's got to be some merit to that, right? So that's just all I'm saying. So, again, and it's because of the fact that the measurements there's been so many of them that have been different at the pro days by some, scouts who are, trained to do this also. That tells me something, so that's just my opinion on that. But anyhow, you got any last minute thoughts on that, Tim, before we start getting into this running back talk? I will mention before we get into this, guys, well, actually, just tell me if you got any last minute thoughts real quick, Tim, and then I'll get into this.
No, I'm honestly ready to be done talking about that for now, just because it's been so redundant for us. And I know it's a big thing. And a lot of it is because there's so many people that are mocking him to the Bears. And I don't see a scenario of that happening at 10 unless they want him to play. Yeah, exactly. It's like beating a dead horse. So I don't know. I don't want to speculate it because I don't know. I don't really know what they're going to do. I just don't think that it's as much of a likelihood as people think, especially the measurement thing is going to be a big deal. What do teams really look at with that? Are they going to look at the pro day or are they going to look at the combine? Nobody's going to know until draft night, period.
Yeah, I mean, really the biggest reason I mentioned is because it came up today, and it's a thing that people are talking about. And if that's a legitimate thing, that it is kind of a big deal. So, in any case, I agree. I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to go on and on with it either because I agree with you, Tim, that it's something we've been talking about at length. But, anyways, as Aldo says in the chat,
pun there intended, right? We've talked about it at length.
Yes, we have. We have talked about it length, pun intended, for you. I didn't even think about it. So, anyways, but yes. As Aldo says, we have some questions in the chat already. Keep them coming, guys. We'll get to them best we can. I saw at least a couple from Cliff, and they were good ones that I do want to address later on. So, keep them coming, guys. We'll do our best to get to them. We had some questions last week, too, that were pretty good that we didn't get a chance to answer that I might try to address at the end of the show as well. But anyways, moving on. We're going to talk a little bit about running backs. And when we start this process here, when we start talking about this a little bit, I have a few guys that I want to dig into, and I think Tim has a few guys that he wants to talk about a little bit. I will mention one thing. Aldo's got a graphic that he's going to put on the screen. There's a link for you guys to check out. There's this mock draft database is what the website is, but it's basically a consensus big board every year that I've been using for about 3 years now, I think. And what they do is they take a lot of the big boards from across different media platforms like ESPN, like Dane Brugler and Daniel Jeremiah and Bucky Brooks and all these different people, right? They take their mock drafts, they combine them together. They take consensus big boards from different platforms, different big boards from different platforms. They combine them all together and they turn it into this big board, right? And what I found about this thing, and Aldo's got it on the screen, so thank you for showing this right now, Aldo. But this thing is usually pretty accurate from what I've seen. There are obviously there's always some years where some things happen that are unexpected. But for the most part, these fall in line pretty well. And I think I do have my old list from last year still. If I get a chance, I'll go grab them and I'll show them to you guys. But like last year, for instance, I remember one big one that was obviously different was they had Michael Penix was like a second rounder or something. He obviously went 8th. So that was the one that was a big difference that was not expected. But for the most part, it was relatively accurate. So, and it's in my opinion, it's because you're taking all these different, opinions from all these different people, and you're combining them together, and you're getting a pretty good idea of where the player should go. Now, obviously, like I said, there's exceptions because there's teams that fall in love with players and like them better than other teams do. So you end up taking that guy, and maybe he goes a little higher than expected. So that's kind of why I think it happens that way. But in any case, check this out, guys. It's a good little resource for you if you'd like. And then you kind of get an idea. And they do have little tidbits in here too, like where these guys are being drafted in different, like if you click on their name, it'll tell you where they're being drafted by different teams. It also divides it by year. It divides it by position. So you can click on a position group, like the running backs, for instance, like we're going to do tonight. And it'll give you the order in which they're ranked on the consensus big boards. It'll give you their overall ranking right next to them. So I believe Jeanty's like 7th, for instance. Hampton, I believe, was 29th. So he's like a late first round ranking according to this board. So, and you can, as Aldo's showing you here, you can actually click on each individual player and you can get some of their numbers here. It's not great statistic wise or analytic wise or like as far as like scouting reports, but it kind of gives you an idea of like where players are rated as opposed to the other ones by certain networks and certain people. So it's really cool. Check it out if you get a chance to, and it'll help you give an idea of where guys should and could go in the draft. But speaking of running backs, I'll just mention the first guy real quick because he's the top guy on the board. Everybody knows, everybody's been hearing about him at length, and I don't want to dig into it too much because of that, but everybody knows about Ashton Jeanty. Like I said, everybody's talking about him. You guys have all heard about his strengths and his weaknesses. I'll just give you guys my quick rundown of what I see from him when I watch him play. This guy has phenomenal
contact balance.
Yes, contact balance, but it's not just contact balance. He has an ability to stay strong and stay fast within that contact balance. He doesn't lose his speed as he has to move and as he takes on contact, which is pretty impressive. His ability to break tackles as part of that contact balance is very strong. He's very strong through contact. He's a short, compact, stout guy, very strong, very, very fast. I wouldn't say he's like elite speed type, like there are some other backs in this draft that are faster than him, but he is very fast. He can break some long runs off. He does it a lot in college. I've seen him. He does make some moves in the open field. He has, like I said, he's a high quality. He's a high quality back. He's a guy you can see on first, second, third down. He catches the ball well. He's a 3-down back, in my opinion. Like I told you guys before, I just don't know if I love the idea of the Bears drafting a first-round running back. I think they've set themselves up to do so if they wanted to. I think he'd be successful in this offense. I think he'd run well behind our offensive line. So if they did draft him, I wouldn't hate it. I just wouldn't be in love with it, until obviously, he changed my mind with this play on the field. But, all I'm saying is there's a lot to like about the guy. I don't even think he's going to be there by the time the Bears get there at 10. My personal opinion, I think he's a very good player, and I can see why teams see him as a top 10 player. I just don't know that I see him as like that level myself. Like, I don't know if he's quite like Saquon level coming out, but that's just my personal opinion. Do you have anything you want to say about Jeanty, Tim, before we move on to the next guy on that big board list who is one of your guys?
No, because I actually wanted to do this in reverse order, if you're okay with that. So I do want to get into Jeanty a little bit later, a little bit more. But if you're good with it, Jeff, I want to go in reverse order with this of where I view the rankings, and it's pretty similar to where everybody else looks at it. And I want to start with Bashal Tootin. And guys, I'll tell you to begin with, I will let you know as we go through here if I think that these guys are a fit or not for what the Bears want to do. So at number 10, Bashal Tootin. He's 5'9", 29.5-inch arm length, 206 pounds, 4.3, 240 speed. So he's super fast for a running back. The production was definitely there. He started off at North Carolina A&T, and then he was at last year at Virginia, last 2 seasons at Virginia Tech. I'll just give you a quick rundown of what Lance Zierlein says about him. If you spend too much time focusing on the small inconsistency of Tootin's college game, you'll run the risk of overlooking the match he is for the pro game. He's an explosive athlete with average size but a compact frame. He has elite straight line speed and easy hips to make sudden cuts and turns. He's fairly average at reading the front and running with early decisiveness, but creates with wiggle, power, and speed. Drops and fumbles are a concern, and there were a lot of them. I believe he fumbled the ball 9 times last year. But runners with his contact balance, power, and home run speed put tremendous stress on defenses over 4 quarters. He could become a starting caliber back with 3 down value. Now, his NFL comp is Isaiah Pacheco. But do you know who my NFL comp is, Jeff?
Who? Tootin?
Yes.
Who?
It is DeAndre Swift. If you are looking for another DeAndre Swift, Bashal Tootin is that guy.
Yeah, poor man's.
Maybe a poor man's, but he could end up being just as good as Swift. And part of that reason is he lacks decisiveness to find the hole. Very similar to what we see with DeAndre Swift. And he's more of that speed guy. He's not going to be a guy that comes in there and just plows through the tackles for you. That's not Tootin's game. So, in my opinion, Tootin is not a fit for the Bears right now unless they would move on from DeAndre Swift this year or next year. So, in the event that they were to draft him, which I think would be foolish this year if you're not going to pick up a power back, because in my opinion, if you were to draft Tootin, that means you plan on moving on from DeAndre Swift at least by next year. So, you have any thoughts on Tootin before we move on to the next player here?
No, just go through your list real quick, and then I want to show that big board list of their top players on the running back side, and then we're going to do our little, because I have a couple guys I want to do my actual reports on, and then you can do whatever you want with them.
Okay, next guy is Ollie Gordon, Oklahoma State. Let me get his measurables here real quick for you guys. 6'1", 226 pounds, so a little more of that bruiser. 4.6, 140 though, so he's not very fast. That's a pretty low 40 time. I will give you Lance Zierlein's overview real quick. He's a big workload back with a skill set that requires a physical downhill run scheme. Gordon is tight-hipped and forced to run linear tracks. He plays with adequate decisiveness and interior vision, but lacks the agility to cut sharply or slip tackles in tight quarters. When he gets downhill, he becomes a battering ram, slamming through tackles and adding tough yards after contact. He's good in the screen game and could improve his protection in time. His 2024 production fell off through no fault of his own. Gordon is big and physical and could attract day 2 attention from teams looking to add a bruiser two-back system. Now, I do believe Ollie Gordon is a fit here. I think he would be a good complement for that Thunder and Lightning. However, I think of the power backs that we're talking up in that threshold of the draft, he's one of the lower end for me. And the reason is I look at Ollie Gordon and I see Quinshon Judkins. I don't see a huge difference there in the two. And in my opinion, if we're taking a running back in this draft, it needs to be an upgrade over Quinshon Judkins. So in my opinion, Ollie Gordon could be a good complement, but I don't think he has that explosiveness that we need. And again, it's a lot like Quinshon Judkins. What do you think, Jeff?
Like I said, I'm going to be honest with you guys. I haven't done a ton of work on everybody in this draft yet. So I haven't had a chance to watch as much of this guy. I tend to kind of agree with you. I mostly focused on guys that I think are more fits for the Bears, and especially guys who have speed, because I think the Bears are going to be targeting that. But like I said, I have 3 guys that I want to do pretty detailed breakdowns on, and I don't know how you want to handle that, Tim. Do you want to just go through your list real quick, and then I get to that after you're done? And then also, like I said, I want to show that the top running backs that are on that consensus big board, so everybody gets an idea of how they're listed and how they're ranked there, as opposed to kind of where your list looks.
Yeah, so I'll try to buzz through this a little bit. My next one, my number 8 ranked is DJ Giddens from Kansas State, 6'2", 212. He's pretty fast though, 4.43 speed. He's a productive runner. He lacks explosive elements though. He's probably more of that DeAndre Swift, more of that lightning guy. So I don't know that he's necessarily what you're looking for a complement to Swift. And then I'll go ahead and jump to the next guy to try to speed this up along here. The next one is Dylan Sampson. I'm blanking on his school now. Tennessee, I believe. Yes. Tennessee running back. I think he's a little more of a fit than some of the others. Sorry, I lost my train of thought here. Run after contact is really good for him. He'd be good in the space blocking scheme, which is very similar again to DeAndre Swift, but I think he's got a little more of that burst and pop between the tackles, in my opinion. I'm sorry, guys, I skipped Cam Skatteboo, but I want to go to Cam Skatteboo real quick because there's a lot of chatter from a lot of people who really like Cam Skatteboo. You want my honest opinion, he's going to be a bust in the NFL. And my reason behind that is because he lacks explosiveness, and the way he runs, he's good because of how hard he runs. But when he gets to the NFL, that's going to be hard for him to have a consistently long career because he's just going to get hammered at that rate. I don't think he's the athlete that some of these other guys are. He doesn't have the speed that some of these other guys do. I know a lot of people like Skatteboo, and especially because of that bowl game, the playoff game, excuse me. I'm just not a big fan of Cam Skatteboo. So that's just my opinion on him. Jeff, what do you think? That's why I have him ranked a little lower than most people do.
I'll say this about Skatteboo. I'm not going to say he's going to be a bust. I think he's an interesting guy. I'm not going to say I'm not using this as like a player comp. He kind of reminds me like the way he ran is like with David Montgomery. He's a guy who played really well in college, and he didn't run particularly well, which is probably going to hurt him a little bit. But I think he can be a productive player. He's obviously not the fastest guy in the world. He's strong. He's had a lot of production in college. So I think he's a guy who could be a guy who could be a diamond in the rough that you get late in the draft, who people are like, well, you saw what he did in college. What were you thinking? Or he could be a guy like you said, who ends up doing nothing. But I think he'll be a pretty good player. I just think I don't see him being like a fit for the Bears, for instance. I just don't. I don't think he makes sense for them. I just think they're looking for more dynamic playmakers than a guy like Cam Skatteboo would bring to you.
Carl makes a good point here. I don't know if he intentionally did that, but he said he sees a lot of Mike Alstott in Skatteboo. Maybe he is a guy that comes in and plays fullback, because I don't know if I see him being an NFL running back, but maybe being a fullback, or I should say an NFL tailback. I could see him being more of that fullback role. Yes, that's an excellent point, Carl. Let's go ahead and continue on here. I believe the next one I've got here is Kaleb Johnson. Yes, Kaleb Johnson. So this is the one, in my opinion, if I had a ranking here, I would say that Kaleb Johnson would be my number 3 running back that I would like to see go to the Bears if I had to put my guys in order, because Kaleb Johnson fits perfectly what they want to do here. Now, the problem with Johnson is there's a lot of people who are on his 40 speed. I think that will drop him in the draft just a little bit because he's not quite as fast as people thought he was. But if you watch his tape, he does have some breakaway speed. It's not like he doesn't have that on the field. Excuse me. But I really like Kaleb Johnson. He's a great bruising running back, can find the holes, and just watch his tape. He had some really big runs where he just blew past people. That's a guy I would really like to see here. So if the Bears, in fact, were to wait until the second round, I would say later second round or even early third round, I think he could still be there. I would definitely look at Kaleb Johnson if they haven't drafted another running back yet. What are your thoughts, Jeff? I really do like Kaleb Johnson, though. Big fan of his.
I kind of agree with Cocaine Bear here, Chad. I just mentioned David Montgomery. Kaleb Johnson gives me a bit of David Montgomery vibes, too, like you're saying here. And the reason I say that is the same thing. You know, he's a guy who played really well in college, tons of production, didn't run particularly well. But I think he has a better chance of success than Skatteboo. I think this guy is a true, at least 2 down back. has some issues in blitz pickup and pass pro. So I don't know that's a guy that you're going to see a lot on third down, at least early on in his career. But I think he's a good starting level running back. I think he can be good. He can be a good player. Again, I'm not sure he's going to be a guy who's a total fit for the Bears because of the fact I think they're going to be looking for more speed, more athleticism. That's just my personal opinion. But go ahead, Tim, with whatever thoughts you had.
No, I agreed with that. I totally agree with you. And that I want to get to that later because I think there's literally one player in this draft that I think fits all of those needs and is an elite player. And we're going to get to him in a minute. But the next one I have is TreVeyon Henderson. I love both of these Ohio State running backs, and I know you do too, Jeff. But the reason I've got TreVeyon at number 4 is I see him being more of that lightning running back, but Judkins had the faster 40 time. So Judkins is actually a little bit faster than Henderson, and he's got that power and breakaway speed. I think you can't go wrong with either one of these guys. But if I had to pick one for the Bears, I think Judkins is certainly the better fit for what they want to do this year. I think he's a better complement to Swift than Henderson, although I think if you needed Henderson to be that between the tackles guy for you, he could do that role as well. He would do it better than DeAndre Swift, in my opinion. And I'll preface this by saying any of these top 5 running backs, I think if you bring them in right now, are running back 1 over DeAndre Swift. Any of those top 5, any of these guys that I've got on this list. But I really like Henderson, and I'll quickly jump into Judkins because they're kind of 1A, 1B Ohio State guys. But Judkins is more of that power guy. Like I said, he's got the speed over Henderson, at least based on the 40 time. Again, I believe that the speed on the field is different. So I do like Judkins a lot, though. J2K, are you talking about the pro day? Because if I'm not mistaken, Judkins had the faster 40 time at the combine, which was surprising to most people because Judkins is the bigger, more powerful back. So you'll have to let me know that in the chat because I thought that was the case in that part. But in any case, I really like both of those guys, and I think Judkins would be the better fit for what the Bears want to do, in my opinion. Jeff, what are your thoughts on those two?
So Henderson, speaking of which, I told you guys I had some guys I'm going to break down. Henderson is one of those guys I'm going to break down. So I have a detailed report for you guys on him that I see as a player. Judkins, I like him a lot too. I really do. Judkins is they're different players. Judkins is a more powerful player than Henderson. He's also fast. He's not as fast as Henderson. Tim, as J2K has at the combine, Henderson did run faster than Judkins. I don't know. I stand
corrected, and I apologize, guys. For whatever reason, I thought that it was. I was surprised. Maybe I dreamed that, but it would have been a surprise for Judkins to be faster.
It's not a huge difference. Like Cliff was talking about, it's such a small 4.43 to 4.48. It's not a huge. They're both very, very fast, but 4.43 is like, that's. And
it also doesn't matter when they're in their underwear running on turf. So the play speed is what really matters, what they are on the field.
I think I like them both. I like Judkins a lot. I mean, like I said, I'll talk about Henderson a little bit, but Judkins I like a lot. I think he's a different kind of player. The one thing I will say is that everybody keeps talking about how we need like a compliment to DeAndre Swift. I don't think we necessarily need a compliment. They have an out on his contract after this year. And I don't necessarily think that they're looking to keep him beyond this year. They might, depending on the kind of season he has, but they might be looking for a guy who can be a true 3-down back. You never know. But there are some other guys that they could be interested in, who I'll talk about also later on, that are later round guys who they could be looking into bringing as like complementary players. But again, I still think they're looking for like speed and dynamic ability, and I think Judkins offers that as well. But in any case, I do like him as a player too. But like I said, I'll talk about Henderson a little bit. Go ahead with your list, Tim.
So to finish it off, this may be a surprise to most people, but my number 2 running back is Ashton Jeanty, not my number 1. And here's why. You made a lot of excellent points, Jeff, especially with his contact balance. Guys, I don't want to take that. Ashton Jeanty's a great player, and I think he's going to have a pretty good NFL career. I do. My thought is, when I did this, I believe that Omarion Hampton is going to have the better NFL career. That's why I ranked him number 1. So just to kind of preface this here. So Jeanty, like you said, the contact balance, One thing I notice on tape is when he has to start and stop, after his stop, it's almost like he didn't slow down. He just continues with the same speed that he was running with when he had to stop. It's very impressive. It is. My issue with him is when he faced tougher competition, i.e. the Penn State game, he was almost completely eliminated. Now, granted, all Penn State did was they said, look, we know Boise State can't do anything except for run with Jeanty. Let's just shut him down. That's probably not going to happen in the NFL, because especially if he were to go to a team like the Bears who have other options. At the same time, it's a little bit concerning. Like, when a team is in there to shut you down and you have no answer, that's a little. Now, again, that's probably more of a concern for the coaching staff at Boise State than it was for Jeanty. But I was kind of hoping to see him prove that it doesn't matter if you try to shut me down, I'm still going to find a way to torch you, give my team a chance to win. And I didn't see that. And there is a very good argument to be made that he played in they play in the Mountain West, correct? Boise State does. The competition in the Mountain West is not the competition that you see in the other Power 4 conferences.
One thing I didn't mention too before you go on, and I think it was Cocaine. I can't remember exactly who was talking about Cocaine Bear, who exactly mentioned this in the chat. But Jeanty has had some issues with holding on to the football too. Yes. I think he had a couple fumbles in the Penn State game, if I'm not mistaken.
Omarion Hampton had 0 in 2 seasons, 0 fumbles.
So that is kind of a concern, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And here to finish what I was saying. Now I lost my train of thought where I was going with that. But in any case, look, I don't think I think it's a fair point to say that the level of competition isn't the same, because we see this kind of stuff all the time. Now, for the great players, it doesn't matter at the end of the day. They find a way to succeed in the NFL still because they are that good of a player. And is the Mountain West, it's not like he's at Ashland University, but it's still a drop off. It is still. I
still think he's gonna be a really good player.
I'm not disagreeing. I'm not disagreeing. And like I said, I don't want to take anything away from him. I just think for the position that the Bears are in right now, if you're going to take a running back in the first round, you want it to be a guy who, one, fits what you want to do. 2,
all right, well, get on with it and talk about your guy then.
Well, okay. So, again, like you just said, the fumbles are an issue. Hampton did not fumble in 2 seasons. He is a true 3-down running back. And he also offers you the opportunity, say, if you walk away from DeAndre Swift next year, which I believe they will, it opens up the opportunity for them to now draft a Lightning running back to complement him. And, selfishly, I could see Jeremiah Love being that guy, or Notre Dame guy. I think he would be a perfect pairing with a guy like Omarion Hampton. But, maybe I'm just dreaming that. In any case, Hampton just has a knack, obviously, for running through guys. And, okay, so it's not like some of these other guys are very good at that. They are. They're power backs. This is what they do. But he has an extra level of that. And again, I see him being a 3-down running back. He is willing to block. He's not the best in pass protection, but he's a very willing protector and a very willing run blocker as well. Or out, he's good in blocking, or he will go out in space and block for his receivers or whoever. He's going to need some refinement. Absolutely. He is a pretty decent pass catcher. He actually runs decent routes compared to some of the others that we've seen. Jeanty, in my opinion, is not very good in that. He's not a very good route runner, which, he's a running back. It's not like a huge deal. But, for a guy that is going to be picked in the top 10, he better be good at that. So, in my opinion, again, I think he's going to have Hampton is going to have the better pro career than Jeanty. And I think he's a better fit for what the Bears need. And if you're looking for that guy that can be that 3-down guy, that can be explosive like that, where then you can use Swift at his strength, which is in playing in space, then this is the guy you want. Because if you draft one of these other guys later, you still may be looking at DeAndre Swift as being the running back one and this guy complementing him. You made a great point, Jeff. I don't necessarily want the Bears to draft somebody just to complement Swift, but I think they do need a player that can complement Swift, if that makes sense. I want that 3-down guy that also complements Swift, that is that power guy, but also has breakaway speed, that also can break off the big chunk runs. And I think the person for that fits that the most is Omarion Hampton. And you don't have to take him at 10. You are able to move down and get him, in my opinion. And you don't, I don't think Jeanty's even going to be there at 10. And if he is, I just don't like the idea of drafting a running back that high unless, again, we're talking about somebody like a Saquon Barkley. In my opinion, the better option would be to trade down and get a guy like Hampton in the mid to late first round that I think would be a better fit and a better player in the long run than Jeanty. Just my opinion.
I was just about to say J2K makes an excellent point here, but I need to move on after this. J2K, yes, I think it kind of depends on the team. Yes. With certain teams, Jeanty would be outstanding. And other teams, I'm not so sure. Like if the Raiders draft him, I'm not so sure about that pairing. If he goes like Dallas, I think he can be really, really good there. So, they have a good offensive line, and they know how to run the football. He could be like Ezekiel Elliott all over for them. So I agree. I think it depends on the fit. But, yes, he's going to be – I think he's still going to be a really good player. I just – depending on who he's with, he could be an outstanding player. So, anyways, let's move on. Aldo has a couple screenshots here that I have from that website. These are the rankings that they have on that consensus big board on these players. So they have Jeanty as their top player. Omarion Hampton is their number 2 running back. So 7 and 27 are their rankings in the first round. Then they have TreVeyon Henderson as their 3rd. Judkins is their 4th, 45 and 48. And then 64, Kaleb Johnson. Those are their second round backs in those 5 there. Those 5. Skatteboo is 66. Surprising. That's a little high, I think. And that's another guy Tim mentioned. Then there's some other names we really didn't talk about much. Sampson and DJ Giddens. Tim talked about Bashul Tootin. He's 115 on their rankings. Ali Gordon is 124. And there's a couple guys I'm going to talk about here real quick. Jaden Blue and Brashard Smith. So I'm going to start with Jaden Blue. And the reason I want to start here is because Ryan Poles and Eric Bieniemy, the running backs coach, were at Texas Pro Day. And they got an up close look at this guy. He's ranked 168 on this big board. And Brashard Smith, I believe, is like 185. So they're 6th round projection on this board. The Bears don't have a 6th round pick, which is kind of interesting to me. And I'll tell you why in a minute here. But anyways, speaking of this guy, Bears were at his pro day. Poles and Eric Bieniemy, they saw this guy up close. I've watched this guy play a little bit, and I really like him a lot. There's a lot to like about this guy. This is why I say I think the Bears are looking for speed. And then Aldo's got some highlights here, which is awesome. I appreciate you getting this here, Aldo. This is what I see from Jaden Blue. I don't have a lot of notes on him. I have more on the other guys, but this is kind of what I see. He's 5'9", 196 is what he's listed. The speed is obvious. He's very shifty, hard to tackle. He makes guys miss, mostly with quickness and speed, but he has deceptive strength for his size and is not afraid of contact. Shows receiving ability with strong hands and has good run after catch ability. You can see it right here in this clip. This guy is running through and past people. So he's got very, very high-end speed. He's a much better – I think it's interesting he's a 6th round guy because I think he's a better running back prospect than Quinshon Judkins coming out, just from what I'm seeing from him. But that's my personal opinion. I don't know where he could get drafted. Like I said, the Bears don't have a 6th rounder. They do have 5th round. Could he go there? Possibly. Do they see him as maybe a 7th rounder that could fall there? Possibly. But he's an interesting guy in that area. So that's a guy to keep an eye on, in my opinion, is this guy, Jaden Blue. Big time speed. I think he ran like a 4.28 and 4.29, I think were his 40s at his pro day. I mean, he's insanely fast. So again, guy to keep an eye on to here. Next up on my list here I want to talk to you guys about is the guy I just mentioned, Brashard Smith. This guy's really interesting to me. He's another guy, like I said, on that board. He's shown as a 6th round guy. He's 185 on their board, on the consensus big board. He's interesting to me. He's a guy he's 5'10", 194, so he's not quite as thick as Jaden Blue is. He's a thinner guy, but he's also very, very fast. I saw him as very similar to Jaden Blue. His speed was also very obvious on tape. He's very shifty. This guy can really move. He has a second gear when defenders close in. He has an excellent ability to change direction and has straight line speed, straight line speed is also excellent. Aldo has another highlight for you here, which is awesome. Thank you, Aldo, for this. You guys can see for yourselves. He understands angles and how to use his speed to his advantage in space. Not sure if he's quite as strong as Jaden Blue from what I'm seeing from him, but he moves a little better in my opinion. Just a little bit shiftier, a little bit faster, a little bit more fluid mover than Blue. Just my personal opinion. Even though the 40 time, I think Blue was straight line speed faster. I do think Smith runs a little bit better on tape, though. Just my personal opinion. He is a little small, Romy, which is why he's a later round guy. I don't see him as a 3-down back by any stretch, and I don't see Blue as either. These guys are like more gadget type players, I think, who have room for upside and growth. Now, Smith is interesting as well because he also has punt and kick return ability. So he's a guy to really keep an eye on too. And another thing as well is the Bears are reportedly bringing him in for a 30 visit. So as you guys know, when the Bears do that, they have a tendency to look at these guys and have serious potential in drafting them. To finish my notes on Rashard Smith, he also, like Jaden Blue, doesn't shy away from contact. He shows ability as a receiver with strong hands at the catch point. I think his game translates well. I think he does have some issues with fumbles that need to be corrected. I really like him if the Bears don't take it back on day 1 or 2. And even if they do, I think he makes sense as a later round guy because, like I said, he's a guy who can play special teams. So as J2K mentions here, he can play all 4 phases of special teams, great hands as he was a wide receiver with Miami the year before. Yes, he was, and he was pretty good there too. 1 year as a running back, but he had 1,400 yards, so much upside. Yes, I agree. Smith has a ton of upside. He's a smaller guy, which is why I said I don't think he's a 3-down back, but I like him a lot. I think he makes a lot of sense later on. Like as a 5th-round pick, I think it makes a ton of sense. Like you're saying here, J2K, I agree. I think 5th round for Smith is a good spot for him in the Bears.
I want to make a point, Jeff. Yeah. I want to make one point real quick before you move on. Romy made a good point. No, he doesn't want to see another gadget guy like that. And I look, guys, I got to say it quickly. The Bears need a 3-down running back. I know Carl's here in the chat, and he'll tell you right now, in my opinion, I agree. The Bears' number 1 need right now is a starting caliber running back. And the only way, in my opinion, you're getting a starting caliber 3-down back is if you take one of those first 5 guys. So if we're looking toward these guys later in the draft, it's not going to be that top 3-down starter.
Yeah, specifically the 2 guys that I just broke down for you guys. Those are not starting caliber running backs. Those are guys who, like I said, Smith has a lot of upside on special teams. I think he's a guy you can use offensively as a gadget type player. But you're getting him later on in the draft. You're not expecting him to be a huge contributor. And if he is, that's fantastic, So like I said, if they don't, I think they will still draft a running back early on. I think they need to because they need a guy who can get the job done down the line. They need a guy who is a future piece of this puzzle, if that makes sense, a long-term contributor, which is.
I like this comment.
Moving on to my last guy, and as Carl says, why can't we take a gadget guy at all? I don't think we want to add only a gadget guy at running back, but let's draft Hampton and Blue. We have a mastermind offensive quarter. That's kind of what I'm going to get to here, Carl. Tim likes Hampton a little bit more than I do. I think he makes sense as like a thunder and lightning kind of thing with Swift. Sure, I understand the thought process behind it, and I think he can be a really good player. I just think that I think the Bears, this is just my thoughts, my speculation. I think the Bears are looking more speed, dynamism, my personal opinion, which is bringing me up to this last guy. Okay. TreVeyon Henderson. This is probably my favorite back in the entire draft.
You say speed?
So, he's fast.
Did you not know that Omarion Hampton is every bit as fast as Henderson?
He might have run that in the combine. He might have run that in the combine, but you watch him on tape, on film. In my opinion, Omarion Hampton is not as fast as TreVeyon Henderson.
You're talking about him being caught up with, though. That could
I'm
be.
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about on-field tape speed. Okay, so let me
I
just break it down.
with you there.
This is my thoughts here. So I'm sure Aldo's got a highlight here, which of course he does. This is fantastic. So here's some highlights of Henderson. You guys can get a look at it for yourself. Look at this guy move. I mean, he is fast. So here's my thoughts on Henderson. He's 5'10", 202. So he's a little bit more compact and built than like the last guy I talked about, Smith and Jaden Blue. This is a guy who's built well enough to actually play all three downs, in my opinion. So let me get into this. Speed, elusiveness, vision, burst, acceleration, cutback ability is excellent. Ability to bounce off contact, strong through it, catches the ball well, can get open downfield. I've seen him get open a lot on wheel routes in particular. Lost my place here. Catches the ball well, get open downfield. Like I said, his pass protection and blitz pickup is outstanding. The guy goes and gets his guy.
A highlight.
Yeah, the guy goes and gets his guy and gets his face in there. I'm sure there's more highlights of him doing it too because he's consistent with this. Like I said, he gets in there and gets his face in there and he gets into guys. And I love that about him. To me, he is the best pass protector in this entire draft in the backfield. So I love that about him. Very shifty, not exactly a juke move, but I've seen him fake guys out in the open field. He hurdled a guy against Tennessee. In a play against IU, he was about to score on a long run and slid just short of the goal line to allow Ohio State to run more clock off with under 2 minutes to play at the end of the game. It shows me he's both smart and unselfish, wants to win. He's my kind of football player. I love this kid. I think he has true 3-down back potential. He's one of my favorite players in the entire draft. And I don't want to catch any flack for this because I don't want to make comparisons, but just kind of thinking about past Bears, there's a little bit of he kind of reminds me of a bit of like a shorter Matt Forte. Just a little bit. I mean, I really like the way this guy plays. That's why I said I want to compare him. I don't want to ever do that because Matt Forte was a fantastic player and this guy's not played in the NFL yet. But the way he played in college, I really, really like the way he plays. And I think his game's going to translate. And I think he can be a true 3-down back. So
I want to make a point quick.
Finish your thoughts on so we can get to questions and get out of here.
This was an excellent point. Bear Down Sports said we should not expect the Bears to do this. Aldo was reading my mind here. We shouldn't expect the Bears to do the same thing the Lions did. And I will point to that because, number one, the first thing that we're doing differently already is we're running more of a wide zone. They did not run a wide zone in Detroit, but they are sticking with what the Bears have done over the last few years, and they even brought in a center that is his specialty. So right off the bat, Ben Johnson is not saying, look, this is what we're going to do. It's he went right. He did exactly what he said he was going to did exactly what he said he was going to do in his press conference, which was we're going to tear this thing down to the studs and build it based on what we've got player-wise, what our strengths are. That's what we're going to do. And that's exactly what he's doing. So excellent point there, Bear Down Sports, but I agree with you. And that's why I think we're going to continue to see guys that are going to complement what we have now and then also take this over the top. And that's why, I try to – there are certain things I do think he's going to want to stick with from Detroit, but there will be a lot of differences. And I think that's why this guy is a mastermind because he's going to do exactly what fits these players and he's going to get the most out of them. That's why his offenses are so good because that's what he does. So, sorry, Jeff, go ahead and get to your next point or we'll get to our questions here and we'll cut you guys out.
Let's just get to the questions. And here's a really recent one from Romy. He asked if blocking is important for a starting running back. And I'm not sure if you're asking like seriously, if that really matters or if that's like a joke because, he's a running back and running backs aren't necessarily expected to block as what linemen do. But in honesty, Romy, it is important on passing downs. If the running back is not even if he is running around, a lot of times you're going to expect him to get in some blitz pickup and either chip a guy or stop a guy from getting to your quarterback, while other guys are running routes trying to get open, So a lot of times it is important because a lot of running backs really fail in that regard. And they're not very good at it and they get knocked right into the quarterback's lap and it ends up being ugly. So it is important in this day and age and really in the history of the game to have guys who can do that. So,
well, and here's the other part. You don't want to telegraph what you're doing. So if you bring a guy in that doesn't block, then you're telling a team that exactly what you're doing on that down.
And you're right, Tim. It does kind of it's going to show tendencies. And one thing I'll say, Romy, in regards to that is just because a guy hasn't necessarily been a good pass blocker in college doesn't mean, or pass protector in college doesn't mean he can't be at the next level as far as running backs are concerned. It's got to Greg talks about this all the time. They got to have the want to. You got to see them want to do it on tape. If they get beat, but you're seeing them get in there and trying to do it, that shows you that they want to do it. It's probably just a technique thing that can be coached. So that's an important thing to keep an eye on too.
And they do say that is the hardest thing for running backs to transition to in the NFL is pass protection. So running part
that's why I say that's a big part of the reason why I like Henderson so much, because he has everything. And the fact that he shows you right now he can do that at a high level is so intriguing. And if you're looking at 39 and 41, that's a good spot to me for him if he's still on the board, which I think he very well could be there, to snatch that guy up. He might be your long-term guy. I think he's got huge upside. I really think he is a big-time – he could be a big-time player in my opinion. So I'm going to be interested to see if the Bears bring that guy in for a visit. So moving along, some of these other questions, there's a whole bunch in here. I'm going to start from the most recent ones to make this easier. Cocaine Bear wants to know, would you rather have Jeanty or have both Warren and Ohio State running back? I'll take two guys or one. That is a really good question, Cocaine Bear. And you know what? In my personal opinion, I agree with you. I would rather have Warren and one of those Ohio State running backs. Now, Warren is an interesting guy. He's talking about Tyler Warren, tight end from Penn State. This is an interesting guy to me. I think it is very possible that the Bears could have their eye on this guy. Ben Johnson reminds me of the kind of guy that you see a football player that is just a high-level guy who gets the job done, who might not necessarily be conventional, but you can make it work with him and make him a part of your offense. I see them being able to make it work with a guy like Tyler Warren. He's a high-level football player. This guy was, if I'm not mistaken, he was a quarterback early in his career, ended up moving to tight end, and he's more of that move tight end, get open, run routes kind of guy, more so than Komedes. He's not quite as good of a blocker, but he is a willing blocker. Which is why I kind of think it could work there too, because they could have that really 1-2 punch there now, where you're talking about a guy who can actually be that move tight end and get the job done, instead of a guy like, a couple years ago they had Robert Tonyan, who was on his last leg, and who was the guy they brought in last year? Gerald Everett. That was a huge mistake that didn't work out at all. So J2K says he doesn't see Warren as a top 10 pick. I'll be interested to see what happens with him. I think it's possible the Bears could look at him. I would tend to doubt that that's the direction they'll go for a couple reasons. Positional value is part of that reason. Part of the reason also is because I think they have other needs that could be addressed there too. Other players that could be better and available to them, in my opinion. We'll have to wait and see, but I think that's possible. And Cocaine Bear, I still think that you could take a different player like a lineman, like a Michael Williams, for example, or like it depends on your flavor, but maybe a James Pierce. He doesn't have quite the arm length, but he's a very explosive player. He's the kind of guy that maybe you take him there, and then you can still get one of those Ohio State running backs in the second round. I think the Bears are going to be potentially looking at an edge player in the first round if it's there. And I think they'll be looking to move down if they can. So we'll have to see what happens, but there's a lot of potential options we'll dig into later on next coming weeks. So moving on, next question. Do you have anything you want to say, Tim, real quick?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I would rather have the Warren, absolutely would rather have Warren and Ohio State running back, either one of them. Although in my opinion, I would prefer to have Colston Loveland to Tyler Warren in that scenario. But I wouldn't want to take them, and I wouldn't want to take either one of those guys at 10. But if you're holding a gun to my head, I would most certainly rather have that combination than Jeanty at 10.
Yeah, so I agree. So moving on, this question I kind of already answered, Cocaine. Ball security issues, do they matter to you? Jeanty had 2 fumbles in the first 17 minutes of the game against Penn State. Mm-hmm. Most fumbles of all the running backs in his draft class. Facing the lowest level, competition of those running backs. I can't say for certain if that's true or not. I will take your word for it about the most fumbles. But yes, it is a concern. And I mentioned it was a concern earlier. So as I said, I kind of did answer that already. And Henderson is a guy who's got really good ball security. So that again, that's another reason why I like the guy so much. Cliff has a good question here. It's kind of a comment. He says he thinks we can pick the next running back either where the Bears draft in the first round by taking Jeanty at 10, or they could trade down and take Hampton. They could take in round 2. They're good options there. And round 3, there's some options there as well. So I agree. I think that there's a lot of guys in this draft that the Bears will have options. The one thing I will say is I think some teams are going to start to see a run on these running backs going. and they'll start to take him off the board where you might think you get a guy in the third round. Maybe not, he's not available there now because he got taken in round 2. So I don't think we're going to see more than 2 backs go in the first round, but I think we could see a nice little run on them in the second round. We'll have to wait and see about that. But I do agree with you, Cliff. It's an intriguing draft for that. Anything you want to say, Tim?
No, I think you hit that pretty well.
Next question here from J2K. He has a feeling Poles feels like he already fixed the trenches in free agency. Would you be surprised if we went skill players within our top 4 picks? So I think they've done enough, J2K, to where they can address the skill positions. Absolutely. I still think they're going to go after some trench players in the first 4 picks. My dream scenario, J2K, would be something like you get an edge player, an offensive lineman, and a running back with picks with 10, with your first round pick and your 2 second round picks. Or if you move down, whatever, some combination, 3 or first 4 round picks, I would like to see that happen. D-line, edge player, or even an interior player for that matter, like a 1-tech. And like I said before, a running back. So I would like to see something like that play out. I do want to see some skill players happen here in this draft. Later on, like I was talking about, Smith makes a lot of sense as a return guy too. So I agree with you, J2K. I think they've opened themselves up to those possibilities. But I do think a trench player or 2 is coming early on in this draft still, even with what they've done.
In my opinion, at 10, I want trenches. I want O-line or D-line. If you're going to take a positional or a skill player, I would prefer them trade down at 10 or trade down from 10 and then take one of those skill players. So like if you want running back or tight end, I would much prefer them trade back to do that. But as far as if you have to draft or if you have to pick at 10, if you don't find a suitor, I want trenches there. And I don't care that we have a really good offensive line right now. I still want depth. If you're going to get a future star and starter out of that first round pick, I don't care if he sits this year. You draft that guy. Because if you watch anything from Philly or any of these other teams with elite offensive lines, this is how you do it. You definitely stockpile those guys. And if you look at that guy and say, this is the best guy on the board and he's an offensive lineman, then you take him, period.
One thing I want to mention real quick, last thing here, Bear Down Sports said, because I said something about positional value at 10 with the tight end earlier, and he's questioning me on that. He says that tight end is more valuable at 10 than running back, but I think I get the gist of what you're saying, and maybe you mean both those aren't, and I can agree. Yes, both of those aren't, Bear Down Sports. I think running back, in my opinion, it depends on the team, though. It really does. It depends on your situation. Like, for instance, if you're Kansas City and somehow or another you lucked into a top 10 pick because of a trade you had or something, and you want to take a running back there, you're in a great spot to do so. I think it makes perfect sense. There are situations where it makes sense for a team to take a running back in the top 10. For me right now, where I see the Bears, like I said before, I wouldn't hate it if they took Jeanty there, whereas I wouldn't hate it if they took Warren either there. I just personally think positional value-wise, there are other players that you could take either at 10 or you can move down and get better positional value for, because you're going to get more picks if you move down too. So, like I said, I think like an edge rusher makes a lot of sense. There's a guy in particular I mentioned before, Michael Williams. I like him a lot. I don't know if I love him at 10, but if you're stuck there and you really you can't move down, why not? I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, he's got upside, he's got traits, he's got what you look for in a Dennis Allen edge. So that's just kind of my thoughts on that, Bear Down. Do you want to add anything to that, Tim, before we get out of here? I think we're out of questions.
No, I definitely agree that those two are not high priority. And as much as it would pain me to say this, if you knew that Omarion Hampton was going to pick, so say you're at 10 and you want to trade back, but you know that Hampton will get picked before you pick, I still wouldn't take him at 10 because I do think that that's too high. I don't care if it's Jeanty there and you love Jeanty and he's the best running back in this class, in your opinion. I don't think you take those guys at 10 unless they are like a future Hall of Fame, like we said earlier, a Saquon Barkley or maybe even a Bijan Robinson, then maybe you take one there. But in my opinion, the job is not done yet in the trenches. It's not. Offensive line either. We may not have Tooney after this year. He's only under contract for 1 season. And you don't know about injury. We don't know what the future is with the left tackle. In my opinion, I don't care if you have to sit them. And this is the one place I will actually disagree with Greg. Don't tell him. But I disagree with Greg that I don't think they have to start this year if you take them at 10. I don't think it's necessary. If you have a deep roster, which I believe they do, they need depth. They've got starters, but they need depth. And if you believe that that guy that you take at 10 is going to be a perennial all-pro, Pro Bowl player, but you have to sit him this year, then do it. Doesn't matter. Sorry, Greg.
Greg's on line one for Tim. He's going to give some shit for that. I think it makes sense, Tim, if you're talking about like defensive linemen. Yeah, because those are like,
I mean, offensive linemen too. I don't care.
Yeah, more so for D linemen because like King Bookwell was saying in here, you want to have these waves of D linemen coming in. That's why I like Michael Williams so much in the first round because he makes sense. It's a guy with upside who you can bring in and you can groom him along. And, maybe he becomes like a Nolan Smith type player for you who, like the Eagles have all these waves of pass rushers. So I think it makes a ton of sense. But anyways, we're running out of time. Last thing here from Cocaine Bear. He says, Poles better make the right moves. He can't take another last place finish. Ben gives me a little hope, but I believe Poles should have been canned after the season. He set Kaleb rookie year up for failure. I see where you're coming from, Cocaine, but I do think that Poles has done a lot of good things too. And he's also the reason why we have Kaleb Williams. So you got to remember that as well. I think he did right the ship by bringing in Ben Johnson after the mistakes he made in the past. So we'll have to see what happens. And I agree with you. Development is key here. So we'll see what happens. But anyways, we had a great show tonight. We ran a little long. We're sorry for that, Aldo, because I'm sure you're trying to get the hell out of here. But we appreciate you guys all being here tonight. And as I said at the top of the hour, there's a special show tonight coming up at 9 o'clock Central Time. Correct, Aldo? Do Bare Their Souls. Here we go. Yeah, special Bare Their Souls at 9 tonight. BYOB, guys. Bring your own beer. I'll be there with Tooch and Aldo. So I don't know who else is coming on, but we'll see you guys there. Last quick reminder, please like the video, subscribe to the channel. You can find us on X or Twitter. Aldo, our producer, is at Barroom Network. You can find me at _Jeff Willis, and you can find Tim at Tim Willis 24. So guys, as always, thanks for being here. And until next week, bear down.
Da Bears.
The Willis Twin Towers podcast is a Barroom Network production. Jeff and Tim Willis are the co-hosts and co-producers. Aldo Gandia is executive producer. Music is licensed from Pond 5. Any copyrighted material used was done under the Fair Use Doctrine for commentary, criticism, and informative purposes. All of our programming is available in audio-only format by subscribing to the Barroom Network wherever you download podcasts. Videos are archived on YouTube.